you know, we've got this is good, valid information that you could rebuild and test yourself. Now also, going on this theme, Smith stated he had been given instructions from the boys topside about how to build simple experimental hardware. And he said he thought his group was the only one turning the information into real hardware. And being an engineer who designed and built radio equipment, he was quite capable of building these things. He wasn't just some guy, you know, saying that he'd got all this box of bits and it did all this thing. He was actually doing it.
As far as I know, our group in Ottawa are the only group that has actually taken the information which was given to us by the boys topside and translated it into hardware that works. Much information has been given to us through various channels, but people just talk about it. They don't do anything about it. And I think that is deplorable. I think when they give us information, the least we can do is to show our good faith by trying at least to convert that information into hardware. We have built 2 items of hardware on their instructions that I'm rather proud of.
And we'll go on to those items of hardware. The first one is what he called the binding meter, and again I'll let Wilbert Smith explain this.
They gave us the design of the instrument, which was fundamentally this. They said to select 2 materials, one stronger than the other. And they said to arrange so that these 2 materials pulled against each other in such a manner that the weaker material was very near its breaking point and the strong material was a long way from its breaking point. On that basis, we devised instruments, and we built quite a number of them in the shop and sent them around to various people that we knew did quite a bit of traveling. And we asked them if they would investigate the regions through which aircraft must have passed just prior to breaking up in midair. And we have, unfortunately, a large record of our airplanes having done just this. One of these unexplained crashes occurred at a place called Issoudun, which is about 20 miles south and west of Quebec City. And we investigated the region through which this BOAC aircraft must have passed just prior to the crash. And sure enough, big as life and twice as natural, we found a very large and very strong vortex. Our instruments showed it beyond a doubt. It was about 1,000 feet in diameter and roughly circular, with a rather sharp line of demarcation at the edge of it.
So he's basically saying that the regions around the Earth have low binding forces, and he suggested that this might be the explanation for some of the mysterious air crashes, and again in the material, full material that documents one of the air crashes, which seems to happen in the area of what Smith would call low binding, where materials have a tendency to fall apart. And this sort of physics is just not acknowledged by, even today, you know, in the scientific community. Because if you said binding forces, they would think it was meaningless.
Would that be the nuclear force?
No, it's a different binding force. It's kind of like within a material rather than at a nuclear level. That was my understanding anyway. I mean, Smith would have known about the nuclear binding forces because he took advanced courses in physics. And that meter that he built, that's basically some type of special type of strain gauge, which is set with an internal strain. That's the set to be stretching, and that's close to breaking. And this needle would measure how this thing changed. And of course, that should just never move. It should never move. So the fact that he was able to build these things and reproduce them, why did this thing move? I mean, it's not a thermometer. It doesn't work like that. And he would be clever enough to know the difference between a thermometer and something that it measured binding forces. Now again, when we start to get again into the energy question here, and Smith made a special type of coil as used in AM radios, transformers, car engines, and other electrical apparatus, and he called this a caduceus coil. That's one of the names for it. It is prepared and wound in a very particular way. I've tried to do a diagram here. It's counter-wound. And when radio energy of a certain frequency is generated, the coil seems to completely absorb that energy. And this appears to violate the accepted laws of electromagnetism. i.e., if the radio energy goes in, it shouldn't come out as other radio energy, a magnetic force, electricity, or light, or mechanical energy, or some kind of vibration. And here's Smith's description of the coil.
One of those pieces of hardware is a coil. It has a ferrite core and a trick winding on it. To look at it, it looks like a rather oddly wound inductor. When measured on a radio frequency bridge, however, it shows some very peculiar properties. There are certain frequencies at which it is impossible to balance the RF bridge, and that is a direct contradiction to what any electrical engineer will tell you should happen with a coil of wire wound on a ferrite core. Now, if we take this coil and we excite it with radio frequency energy at or near these critical frequencies, we find that energy goes into the coil and nothing comes out. It just disappears. As a matter of fact, we had one coil about 1 inch in diameter and 8 inches long, and we poured a kilowatt into that coil for 2 hours from a kilowatt communications type transmitter. The coil was in a 2-inch brass tube with a plate welded on one end and a transmission line fitting on the other. We could find no radiation around the outside of that tube at all. In other words, the energy went in, none came out. The information which we got from the boys topside was that we were actually making tensor energy, which is a 6-dimensional radio wave. And it is the type of energy that they use extensively for radio communication, transmission of power, and for pushing and pulling. In fact, they use it for just about everything that we could think of.
So that was Smith saying that he'd successfully produced tensor energy, according to the information that he got from the boys topside, using this special coil. Now, somebody like Smith is going to know how to measure the energy going into and out of the coil. That's because that was part of his regular job. So, he knew what he was doing. Now, this is the other interesting thing that Smith started to get into, because he started to talk about controlling gravity, anti-gravity sort of technology. And Smith postulated in simple terms that the force of gravity was actually the result of the interacting magnetic fields that objects themselves generated. And he suggested that an emotional magnetic field might be used to influence gravity. And he and his team designed experiments to test this. And variations on this type of experiment have been reproduced many times in the 20th century. But I don't think Smith was aware of many of those, if any. In the other presentation I mentioned about, I came in and did about anti-gravity, I'll go into some more of these. It seems very unlikely that Smith would lie about his experimental results or misinterpret them. I mean, he wasn't doing research in this area as part of his job. This was all private.
We were able to go into the laboratory and conduct a series of experiments which proved beyond a doubt that this is true. Our laboratory experiments have allowed us to make about a 1% change in the weight of objects. We can make them about 1% heavier or 1% lighter. Now that is a long way from holding a spacecraft up, because we have to go over 100% in order to do that. But the fact that we can do it, the fact that the principles which these people from outside gave us and guided us to finding out for ourselves are valid, certainly indicates that, first, these people are what they say they are. Second, that their technology is what they say it is, that it is superior to ours, that ours is inadequate in many respects.
So that's Smith basically saying, well, I built the stuff, it works, that proves that the information we're getting is coming from real sources. Because remember, he never met any of these people, this was all coming through psychics, and eventually he himself, I think, became a contactee, and he ended up going into the lab with notepads that he'd written out the previous night. So the next thing we come on to is source of hardware. Smith corresponded with several people stating he had handled a number of pieces of source of hardware from crashes or military encounters and had been involved in their analysis. Art Bridge, one of Smith's associates, stated that they were also involved in analysis of a lot, deliberate emphasis, of hardware. Wilbert's son Jim Smith also handled one or more of these pieces, and he describes this here. This was in an interview from about I can't remember the date, I could find it now, about 2004, 2003, 2004.
It was, but it came from the States when it was delivered to the house by a Canadian.
Yeah, so he came from the States. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. On more than one occasion, there were these pieces that were sent to him?
On several occasions, and they'd be of different sizes, and there was no regularity to it at all. So he'd send them away for analysis and try to cut pieces off them and do what he could as well.
Yeah.
Some of those pieces you were saying, some came in the mail, some came by military vehicle.
Yes.
So there was a number of them that were arriving.
Yeah. You actually saw some of these pieces as well, Jim?
Oh, yes. And I saw them when you unpacked the box, see what's in there, and take a look at it.
How old would you have been then?
Oh, well, looking at 10 to 17 in my age group.
Did you get an opportunity to handle any of them? How would you know what was an unusual-looking piece of metal at the age of...
I got to handle a few of them. One was a chunk about the size of a brick, semicircular in shape, a very smooth metal except where the jagged edges where it had been disconnected from whatever it belonged to. It was quite heavy in terms of its size. He had analysis done of that one. I remember seeing that particular analysis sheet come back, and there were a few things in there that they're not found on this planet that were unidentifiable.
Oh, really?
But other than that, they were high tensile steel and whatever else goes into it.
So, presumably that paperwork was secret and he wouldn't have kept any copies of the analysis.
Well, I don't know where it would have gone.
So he was asking if he kept any copy of the analysis. No, he didn't. On the CD that I got, there's actually an interview with this guy, Art Bridge. The audio quality is not great, it's a bit muffled, but you can hear what he says, sort of confirming that he was involved with getting bits of hardware. Another thing that happened, this turned out to be not all that interesting, although in the end, because there's a lot of stuff and it was never really decided what it was, but they investigated this thing, the Ottawa piece, and this suddenly appeared on the shore of the St. Lawrence River in 1960. And it was about 3 tons, composed of high-strength manganese steel, fabricated in layers of 0.01 to 0.8 inches thick, and according to Smith, it looked like the thing had been subject to impact as it fell on a hard surface with very high velocity. The flat, presumably the top surface, was embedded with myriads of particles tentatively identified as micrometeorites, implying that it had come from, from being in space. Analysis showed it to contain known elements, but such as we do not normally use in steels. And it was held by the Ottawa Flying Saucer Club, which was what Smith started, for 8 years. And you can read, there's various scientific analyses that were done on it, but it was all a bit, inconclusive. But nevertheless, it is quite interesting. Now, one of the other interesting things as well, which came up, was stories about Wilbert Smith, included that he had actually personally viewed dead alien bodies. And we were told about the bodies that Wilbert Smith had seen when he was personally invited by the US military. We were simply told that he saw the bodies, and from the impression that I received, it was only for a short time, minutes, not hours. This Montreal Flying Saucer Club member further described the bodies according to what he recalled. Mrs. Smith had stated, this is Mrs. Smith's wife. Mrs. Smith described to his wife the dead occupants as having been approximately 4.5 to 5 feet in height, greyish-blue tint to the skin, large eyes, small slit for a mouth, and 4 long fingers with no thumbs. And here, Jim states what his father said near the time of his death. This is another audio clip from the same interview.
Now, Jim, you mentioned that he was shown bodies at one point, or something like
Yeah,
that?
on one of the times, he was in the States a lot, partly due to his work as superintendent of radio regulations, so he had to deal with frequency allocations and channels and radio and that sort of business. So he was frequently on committees in the States where they were working out joint frequency allocations, for example. And on several occasions he was invited off to be shown things along this line. That was pretty well under the Official Secrets Act, he told us. However, just before he passed away at 62, he felt the Act couldn't get him any more than that. So I did ask him, and he said yes, he saw the bodies.
And he had several connections with the high-ranking military folks, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
One of them was Rear Admiral Knowles, I believe.
Yes, yeah, we were at the Knowles home on many occasions.
Yeah, and he was with, was it the Office of Naval Intelligence?
Yes.
Right, so there was opportunity there for this type of thing to be legitimate. He wasn't just, you know, he was told these things were there and he saw them.
Yeah.
It would have been interesting to be a fly on the wall at those social gatherings, wouldn't it?
Unbelievable, yeah. Did he describe them at all? Do you recall any descriptions?
Not that I can recall, except that the descriptions that have sort of been out and about were fairly accurate.
The descriptions that were out and about were fairly accurate.
Do we have descriptions of grays at that time?
I think there were descriptions of smallish types. I don't know about necessarily the coloring, but
No, I don't remember a lot of those details.
Mm-hmm.
I just read them. It satisfied my curiosity that he had seen them and that they were real.
So, Wilbert Smith dying, is he going to make up a story about seeing alien bodies to tell to his son, or is he going to tell the truth? We'll leave you to make your own minds up on that one. Now, what I liked about Smith is he was very candid, and he came to the same conclusion as I've come to, really. There's no point in investigating the UFO issue anymore, because he basically said, you know, that there was a lot of point in trying to establish the reality of the phenomenon because he knew it was real, and he felt he was ploughing and reploughing the same field. He wanted to find out more about the meaning of the phenomenon. That was his goal. Once he knew it was real, once he knew that these things were coming from outside, he wanted to find out what the actual meaning was. And this is expressed in a letter to Mr. McClelland. I'm not sure who the first name is, but that was written, as you see, in August 58. So by August 58, probably before then, he already knew that this stuff was real. You know, it wasn't for a question of him deciding whether it was real or not, which is what a lot of people today are still trying to work out. Now, another thing that he ended up doing was writing this book. It was never properly finished, but it's called The New Science. In the last few years of his life, Smith turned his attention to the task of trying to rewrite the whole idea of scientific thinking from the ground up, based on what he had learned from his experience and his experiments from the boy's topside. And this is, you can get this off the internet. There's a copy. It's incomplete, but you can get it on Rex Research and a couple of other sites. It's assembled by W.B. Smith from data obtained from beings more advanced than we are. That's what he put on the cover page, or on the inside cover page. And it deals more in what's called metaphysics, rather than science, describing concepts of nothingness, awareness, reality, space, and so on. But Smith was not able to finish this work before he died. Now, what has been covered here obviously isn't the whole story, because as I say, there's about 1,000 pages of documentation associated with Wilbert Smith. But what we have covered in this half, and we haven't finished with Smith completely yet, but I'm probably going to break in a minute. He seems to have been involved in almost all the fields of ufology: sightings, investigation, alien contact, viewing of alien bodies, free energy technology, anti-gravity technology, and he handled saucer pieces and did some analysis. And he also wrote a piece called Official Reticence, in other words, cover-ups. There's a piece about that that you can read on both on the CD and on Grant Cameron's website. There's quite a bit of stuff on Grant Cameron's website about Smith as well. He also had a realisation that metaphysics is important in understanding the phenomenon. Few people are willing to talk about that these days. You know, Nick Coates and all these other people. They never talk about consciousness, which is essentially what this is all about. All this stuff, it's all about consciousness. And Smith realised that. He realised that early on in his research, really. After, well, say early on, probably after about 4 or 5 years, he realised that that was the important thing. And I think what I'm going to do there, because we're at 9:10, I'm going to have a break, and what I'm going to do before we break is, so we're going to return to Smith right at the end, then we're going to move on to some other disclosure matters in the second half, but then we're going to come back to Smith right at the end, because I think what he did finishes it off for us. Okay, so we'll have a break now.
Thanks, Andrew.
Douglas Aircraft, the boys in the back room, also known as BR, keeping a low profile. McDonnell Douglas and USOs. These documents pertain to the research of a small team of people in the McDonnell Douglas Aircraft Corporation between 1967 and 1969. These documents show that some people there took the UFO phenomenon seriously and regarded them as real physical objects worth studying in detail, with a view to developing a new method of propulsion based on a new theory of physics. This research was, of course, secret. So this isn't government-funded research, this is a private company, McDonnell Douglas. In total, there are about 200 pages of documents, although some of these are just cover sheets. I've got all those on my website for anyone who wants to download them. The documents were left in a barn which may have belonged to a Douglas employee who died and moved. The new owner of the place found the files and sold them on eBay for $31. In March 2005, someone made contact with Grant Cameron, who put all the Smith material together, which I've used for this first half of the presentation, and the documents were uploaded to my computer for internet publishing. The gathering of information from contactees is described in these documents as a second main avenue of deriving useful data on UFO propulsion. These documents were written between March 1967 and December 1969, and these people, J.M. Brown, who you can find presentations by him on the internet, Bob Wood, somebody was, I don't know his first name, D.B. Harmon, these are the names on all these documents. There are only about 6 people involved. It wasn't like a huge project involving hundreds of people. Their rationale for the use of contactee data can best be derived from the so-called Advanced Vehicle Concept Research document presentation, May 2nd, 1968. Their philosophy was, these guys, was hear everything and use some of it to our advantage. In other words, they're not going to rule anything out. They're not going to rule anything out because they're looking at a new type of propulsion system. What these guys didn't seem to be aware of, which is what I covered in another presentation, is how the anti-gravity research was shut down in about 1956. All the major aircraft companies up until about 1956, 1957 were doing research into anti-gravity technology, and then it was all shut down. This was after that period. Contactee data could be useful, experiencing high accelerations without forces, visual interference of vehicles. That's the sort of information they were looking for. Now, I sent electronic copies of these documents to Nick Cook, who's a defence journalist, Jay's Defence Weekly, and they were featured in UFOs and Secret Evidence, a documentary which was broadcast on Channel 4 the 13th of October 2005. And there you look. I should have a clip of that here. I just have to go over here and then hope it'll play.
But what really fascinates me as a defence journalist is that you are as likely to find believers in UFOs among the higher reaches of the aerospace industry as you are in Hollywood. This is a report into future technology, commissioned in 1968 by McDonnell Douglas, then one of the biggest aerospace and defence contractors in the world. What's extraordinary about this document is that it takes the existence of UFOs seriously. It recommends using UFOs and copying their design to make the next quantum leap in aerospace technology.
Some UFOs may be extraterrestrial vehicles. They certainly have not been proven otherwise. The existence of extraterrestrial vehicles indicates vehicles could be built which would have capabilities quite useful to McDonnell Douglas Corporation.
The report even suggested interviewing contactees to gather data. And if they were thinking that over 25 years ago, what advances might be on the horizon today?
So I was it was quite interesting that we got those documents whilst he was making that documentary. And they have things like this, there's various diagrams in there, and then one of the concepts, for example, described as a gravity amplifier with this simple diagram. I'm not going to dwell on this because I don't want to go into all the theory, which I don't understand, but these are the sorts of things, I'm just giving you, an idea of the sorts of things they were looking at. Another experiment describes an experiment to measure the effect of a magnetic field on a beam of light, because they suspected there may be some interaction between magnetic fields and beams of light. And they even contain some satirical cartoons, such as this one, where you can see it's a little bit unclear, there's some weird type of photocopy. But this is a United States Air Force UFO Information Centre, and all the guys are tied up, and you've got the aliens here answering the phone, and the aliens answering the phone and says, "I assure you, madam, if any such creatures as you described really existed, we would be the first to know about it." So, I mean, that's quite interesting to find that in a McDonnell Douglas document. Now, one of the running themes that I found when I was looking at these documents, I didn't read all of them because they're some a bit boring really, but if you skim through them, you can get a good impression of what they're saying. This J.M. Brown tried to develop a new theory to explain the behaviour of particles and the way in which propulsion systems of UFOs may operate. So he assumed that they were real. Again, that's a start point, they are real, not that we have to decide whether they're real or not. He called this the kinetic particle theory, based around what he called the Brutino. And this is just a little snapshot from there. Well, not many diagrams or anything. But he's since written a book about this, and there's presentations on the internet about it. But it's just another theory of physics, so, Now, one of the interesting bits was they even considered paying the contactee, Barbara J. Hickox. We discussed the possibility of employing Mrs. Hickox as a consultant. We told her that if she accepted employment as a consultant, the company would expect to own any ideas divulged by her. She would in return receive the agreed upon hourly compensation. We agreed to proceed with background information gathering to prepare a recommendation to our management that should be employed as a consultant at a rate of slightly over $3 an hour. This was in 1968, but even so, if our checks on her resulted in our recommendation to management, and if management concurred, then a few exploratory hours of the time would be utilised. Further time might be warranted to go into various areas in great depth, primarily in her description of the vehicle and its propulsion system, so they were even talking to contactees. You don't hear anything about this in the news, do you?
Does that mean they were taking contactees seriously?
Well, what do you think? That's what the document says.
Or were they just open to that possibility?
Well, they were obviously, took it serious enough to take it to management.
Yeah.
And I asked for payment and put it on a formal basis. That looks pretty serious to me. And I've got that document is listed on there. So, what I'm giving there is an example that's documented. 200 pages of documents showing that this private corporation was taking UFOs seriously, dead serious. And they knew they weren't necessarily going to get anything from it, but they tried to. But this wasn't the first time. This had been done in the 50s as well. But we have, this is the evidence that was given to me. So now I'm going to move on with the history of disclosure, and obviously a lot of people talk about the moonshot and all this sort of thing. And what I found very interesting when I was researching into the disclosure issue is what the astronauts have said. And this is very interesting, because again what you're going to find here is that the superficial things that the astronauts have said seem very interesting, but when you go a little bit deeper, it gets even more interesting. And I've got some video clips. At least 3 Apollo astronauts have publicly commented on UFO subjects. Buzz Aldrin, Edgar Mitchell and Gordon Cooper are the 3 ones that come to my mind. There's other people like Story Musgrave and Brian O'Leary have also commented, although Brian O'Leary came off the astronauts program before doing anything. Story Musgrave has said some things as well. And these 3 are all interesting for different reasons, which we'll see now. Buzz Aldrin. It's worth seeing Buzz Aldrin in the Bart Savell documentary Astronauts Gone Wild, which I've got one of those discs over there. His behaviour in that film may explain why he's flip-flopped over the UFO ET issue as illustrated here. This sort of behaviour is very useful in the UFO ET muddle-up, and it's far more effective than a basic cover-up. In other words, people keep changing their minds. And you can see this here.
But 3 days and 200,000 miles into the flight, Mission Control did miss the significance of a cryptic message from the astronauts.
Do you have any idea where the is with respect to us? Stand by.
The crew required information on the current position of the S-4B, the final stage of the rocket which had been jettisoned away 2 days earlier. This short message hid an extraordinary turn of events. Apollo 11 wasn't alone in space.
There was something out there that was close enough to be observed, and what could it be?
Traveling alongside Apollo 11 was a mysterious object, like this one filmed on a later mission. If the object wasn't part of Apollo's rocket, it could be only one thing: a UFO.
Mike decided he thought he could see it in the telescope, and he was able to do that. And when it was in one position, that it had a series of ellipses. But when you made it real sharp, it was sort of L-shaped. That didn't tell us very much.
NASA knew very little about the object reported by the Apollo 11 crew. It was obviously an unidentified flying object, but such objects were not uncommon, and the history of even Earth orbit space flights going back over the previous years indicated that several crews saw objects.
Despite having a clear view of the UFO, the crew were wary of reporting it to Mission Control.
Now, obviously, the three of us were not going to blurt out, "Hey, Houston, we got something moving alongside of us, and we don't know what it is. You know, can you tell us what it is?" We weren't about to do that, because we know that those transmissions would be heard by all sorts of people, and who knows what somebody would have demanded that we turn back because of aliens or whatever the reason is. So we didn't do that, but we did decide we just cautiously ask Houston, how far away was the S-4B?
Unaware of the drama unfolding in space, Mission Control radioed the position back to Apollo 11.
Apollo 11, Houston, the S-4B is about 6,000 nautical miles from you now, over.
And a few moments later, they came back and said something like it was 6,000 miles away because of the maneuver. So we really didn't think we were looking at something that far away. So we decided that after a while of watching it, it was time to go to sleep and not to talk about it anymore until we came back in debriefing.
To this day, whatever it was the crew saw has never been positively identified or officially acknowledged.
The possibility that you might encounter aliens in space has to be considered in a very sensible and positive and realistic way. There were a lot of people within the program who went off later and became convinced that UFOs existed. And that led to some concern on NASA's part, where they got the agreement of the crew never to publicly talk about these things for fear of ridicule.
I have been always interested in extraterrestrial life, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I had heard that someone was saying that you had seen a UFO. NASA said don't say anything about it, and we might as well get it from the horse's mouth, Buzz. Did you see anything unusual up there?
Well, you know, a guy by the name of Charles Berlitz wrote something about the Roswell incident, and to establish his credibility, he had a little table in the front of his book which attempted to take advantage of alleged observations of people of unusual sightings, and he specifically referred to Anglia TV's reported this, that had been cited by somebody else, that Neil and I saw some green things, green creatures. Well, this kind of spoiled my credibility and a lot of other people. So I decided to take him to court and sue him because he was repeating phrases that were inaccurate. He's not done the right kind of, well, we won the suit. And I, hopefully it would